Welcome, everyone. My name is Caroline Colas, and I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Today, on our online Positive Psychology Hour, a series that we do with the Whole Being Institute, we're going to be talking about busting through burnout, the marathon of COVID-19 with Sherry Kelly, PhD, and Gary Redfeather. After a year of COVID and the availability of vaccines, we are further along in the pandemic journey in terms of time, but when it comes to our emotions, we are transitioning from a marathon of prolonged crisis into an ultra marathon of coping. Join post-traumatic growth expert Gary Redfeather, PhD, and clinical neuropsychologist Sherry Schuyler Kelly to learn how perception, perceived control, sense of self, and coping style can help you bust through burnout. B&B, bust through burnout. If you feel like you've hit the COVID wall, tonight and today you'll discover key strategies for transforming a painful path into one of personal growth. A little bit about our presenters. Sherry Schuyler Kelly is a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist with more than 30 years of experience in the field of child development and health psychology. She earned her doctorate in health psychology from Yeshiva University and is a former National Institutes of Health and National Cancer Institute Fellow in psycho-oncology and neuropsychology. Based in West Hartford, Connecticut, she is best known for her research with teens and young adults on resilience, hope, and cancer survivorship. Gary Redfeather, PhD, runs the Postgraduate Clinical Leadership Education and Research Program at De Montfort University in Leicester, England, as well as numerous leader development programs in the US. His teaching, research, and professional practices weave a deep understanding of neuroplasticity into the development of chronic pain and post-traumatic states, holistic wellness therapies, and organizational development, helping individuals and organizations increase their chances of a future of post-traumatic growth order rather than post-traumatic stress disorder. An Ironman triathlete, Gary was inspired by Tal Ben-Shahar to see how far he could cultivate his mind-body resilience, leading to multiple ultramarathons, including a COVID-19 lockdown virtual version of the John O'Groats to Land's End 825-mile run. This is part one of a two-part series. Part two will be held on June 15th. Welcome to the call, Dr. Sherry Kelly and Dr. Gary Redfeather. Let me spotlight you for everyone. And you will need to just unmute yourself if you haven't already.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone.
Sherry, did you want to start with maybe a mindfulness pause?
I'm going to start with just a little mindfulness pause to get us grounded. And I'm so grateful. I'm going to start with gratitude because that's one of the best ways that we can make ourselves feel grounded and whole. And I'm so grateful to be with you, Gary, today on the other side of the Atlantic. And Caroline, thank you for your support, and Phoebe and everyone at the JCC. We are so grateful for all that you share, that you have shared over this year of COVID and leading us on this journey of healing and insight. So one of the things that is fun to do to help ourselves get grounded and mindful in an easy way is a 5-4-3-2-1 method. So I'm going to ask you to just simply take a deep breath, let it out, and close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And think about 5 things that you could see if your eyes were open. 5 beautiful things that you would like to see if your eyes were open. 5 things maybe in nature. 5 things that make you smile. Now I'm going to ask you to think of 4 things that you can feel that make you feel whole and supported and grounded and happy. 4 things you can feel. And now with a deep breath, and then out with that breath, 3 things that you might hear that might bring joy to you. Think of 3 things you can hear that might bring joy to you. And then 2 things that you could smell that would bring joy and grounding, maybe peace. Maybe it's the smell of flowers. Maybe it's the smell of fresh baked cookies or donuts. And then lastly, one beautiful thing you could taste, whether that's a taste of honey, maybe it's a taste of sea salt, the taste of maybe the cheek of your loved one. Think of something you can taste. And now with another relaxing and nourishing breath. And we'll breathe out and open our eyes and feel more grounded. Thank you. We're all here together. Well, I am so thrilled to be here today with Gary. Can everyone hear me?
Yes,
All
we can hear you.
right. Gary, do you want to say a few things from over there in merry old England?
I just want to say how wonderful it is to do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to start us off, and how easy it is to re-ground yourself. And so every moment of every day, we can do this same type of thing. And so just like a medicine, the more we actually use something like this, the stronger it actually becomes in our body. And so thank you for starting us off. That will be our first medicine for resilience, talking about getting through this ultra marathon that we're going to discuss. It's as easy as that. It gets a little bit more complicated, but that's a beautiful start. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, you know what? I would love to start this journey of healing today and this journey of knowledge. Can I do my share screen, Carolyn?
Sure.
I'm going to try this because, as you all know, I am an analog girl in a digital world. There we go. All right. Breaking through the COVID wall with Gary and Sherry. And let's try this. Now I just got to move it. Let's see. Oops, now it's not moving. There it is. We got it. So Gary is just like a Superman. Gary is an ultra marathoner and a triathlete. I'm just a single marathon. I've done 2 marathons, Gary. These are my shoes, Gary, from my first marathon. They're 40 years old. It was my 40th anniversary this past April 19th that I ran the Boston Marathon, and those are my shoes from 40 years ago. So there you go.
Brilliant.
And I was able to get an exemption because I was a collegiate athlete. So I was able to run it without doing a qualifier. Gary, can tell us about ultra marathoning and why do you do that? And seriously, just give us a little bit of insight on your ultra marathoning.
Okay, so first off, I am not a long distance runner. And so I am an 800-meter runner. So from high school, I set the 800-meter record that still stands, by the way. So I'm celebrating my 40th anniversary next year of my 800-meter record. Now, so the thought of doing 2 extra laps back in high school to do a mile was crazy thought to me, because I'm like, I can't last a mile. I did not run longer than 800 meters. And so I'm really not an ultra marathoner, but my story is a direct consequence of Tal challenging me back in the Whole Being Institute's SIP program during the first year to envision what I could do if I had no constraints, no physical constraints, no emotional constraints, nothing. And then come up with something that sounded so scary and come up with a way to do it. And so the reason why I chose an ultra marathon was because my first response was, there's no way I can get through that, full stop. And then Tal said, don't normal people do this every year? And I said, yes, the vast majority of people who are ultra marathoners are over 55.
Really?
Yes, yes. And in part, it's because when you're in your mid 50s or beyond, the ego starts to fade and you start to go, there's no one I'm competing with but my feet and the distance. And so the reason why ultra marathoning is so popular is because it's not a race. It's really not. There are freaks of nature who run 100 miles. And then there are the rest of us who go, I can jog for a while and then I'll stumble for a lot. I may crawl, I might cry, but if I do this properly, I'm actually able to go that distance. And so I'm still an 800-meter runner who just happens to go now upwards to 800 miles. but I'm not a Superman. That's the key thing, is I am a normal person. And everyone who is a normal person can actually do what we're going to talk about. Not even in question.
Well, that's encouraging. That's encouraging. So one of the things we're going to talk about today, because this COVID pandemic has been like an ultra marathon of sorts for our mind, for our bodies, for our patients. And as any marathoner will tell you, or long distance runner will tell you, you hit the wall. And this happens emotionally, psychologically. And it happens when your stored energy is depleted. You feel exhaustion. And it comes sort of as a discrete onset. It's psychological and physical stress. And as I shared with you 6 months ago, I actually used cognitive behavioral strategies when I was training for my first marathon in anticipating and preparing for hitting the wall. So that was a big part of my training, was to anticipate for that moment, that elusive moment somewhere between mile 18 and 22, where I would hit that wall. So I wanted to share with you this insight from Dr. Shlomo Brezhnitz, who was one of my professors at NYU many years ago. And I just think he puts it really well. The brain does not want the body to expend its resources unless we have a reasonable chance of success. And I think that's true psychologically. Our physical strength, or our inner strength also, is not accessible to us if the brain does not believe in the outcome. Because the worst possible thing for humans to do is to expend all of our resources and fail. So what our expectations are, what we believe is the outcome, is important. So when we're hitting the wall, we should prepare for hitting the wall. And it's this dynamic interplay of physiological, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral systems. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, that is such a powerful thought, because it is such a powerful reality. And so there's lots of other studies that have shown that human beings would rather lie to themselves about their reality and make themselves feel better than to admit the reality. Because some of the things that we believe we can do, or we hope we can do, are just simply beyond our capacity. And we would rather actually kid ourselves, lie to ourselves, than admit it, because it's psychologically a little bit less impactful in the moment, but it's also more destructive over the long haul. And so it serves us better to train ourselves, like you said, train ourselves for the eventual wall. Whatever the wall is going to be. It can be the running wall, it can be the pandemic wall, it can be any wall. It can be the loss of a job, the loss of a spouse. We know a metaphorical wall is going to happen. And so train for it. And then when it's happening, allow ourselves to go into whatever state it is that we need to. And we're going to talk about denial. We're going to talk about freezing. We're going to talk about just simply crumpling and crying. Those are all appropriate behaviors to help us get either past the wall or through the wall or around it. And so it's such a beautiful thought. But the big thing is what we think we will actualize, and it's usually subconsciously, because we don't want to admit this stuff to ourselves, because it can be very painful. But it's a powerful thing to go, it's natural.
So I just put a list, Gary, this ties into what you said, of what causes us to hit the wall. And this COVID wall is a little bit unique and different because of it being so long. And there's so much uncertainty. We don't know the end in sight. And so the things that make us hit this wall is, and make it harder for us, is social isolation. If we isolate ourselves, and we've had this forced isolation, which is so bad for our psyches. A routine that's not healthy. We're sitting at home, we're eating a lot. There's a study came out this week from the American Medical Association on the increase in obesity amongst kids and teens over this past year, because they've been sitting a lot and online learning and not socializing and not doing sports. Fear You play this game with yourself. You put up the fear, which makes the wall come at you faster and harder. Anger, frustration, denial of emotions, which Gary was talking about. And this is not, COVID's not a discrete event. We don't know what the way out is. There's so much uncertainty.
So I would like to ask a question to the group, if that's okay, before we go on.
Go for it.
So if the group would comment in the chat function, what is the difference between being alone and feeling lonely? So what is the difference between being alone and feeling lonely?
Wow.
Okay. Well, there's some wonderful, wonderful responses coming in.
Let's share them.
So feeling lonely is mental or emotional isolation, even if you're connected. Oops, it's scrolling past very quickly. Being alone could feel good. Usually being lonely doesn't feel good to us. Absolutely. So there is a difference psychologically between being alone and feeling lonely. Have you ever felt completely alone in a room full of people? The answer is probably yes. And have you ever felt so connected to Mother Nature, to yourself, to your world when you're completely isolated? And so the point of that question and bringing this up is social isolation does not equate to feeling alone. We can, it's a natural thing. We are social creatures. We develop our minds and our bodies based on interactions that we have on a daily basis, a weekly basis, whatever it is, with other people. When that changes, something is missing. So there is a reaction, but the reaction doesn't have to go down a route of feeling lonely.
Right.
Okay, so this gets us into, there are certain risk factors that you have here on the slide, is that some of these risk factors are risk factors, but they can be mitigated. They can be taken down, if you will, so that they're still there. It's like the wall. It can never be taken away, but it certainly can be handled differently. And things like feeling isolated and not feeling alone is something that we can cultivate. If you don't feel that way, that's okay in the moment, because that's what you're feeling. So thank the folks on the call today for going, being alone and being lonely are two different things.
Gary, I think along with that, I think one of the things that's interesting is to look at this through a bioevolutionary perspective. Okay. And the brain's developed in a way through evolution to change its function based on what your need is. And it's the brain's expanded through evolution. And one of the things that concerns me about modernity, or about our modern era and how we're living, it seems that a lot of us are spending more time in apathy than in action. And that we're, a lot of our time we're apathetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that precludes us from taking the action to make us feel better.
So action is actually the most powerful medicine we have in our tool kit, or in our medicine cabinet, if you will. And so when we think about how we are designed physiologically, we have to think at least 20,000 years ago, if not 200,000 years ago. And because that's really when we started cutting our genetic teeth, if you will. Up until just recent times, like you said, modernity. So modern times is actually pathological to well-being. So
say that again. Wait a second. Say that again. That's controversial. Say that again.
Modern times is actually pathological to well-being. Okay. And when we think about that, even something like sleep, and so we'll talk about the magical running hour for me happens to be between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. I love running in the dark outside with no headlamp. Okay. But sleep is one of those things that is so pathological in modern life because we used to go to bed when the sun went down,
Right.
right? Upwards to about 200 years ago, even the richest people really didn't have a lot of stores of candles, okay?
Right.
So you went to bed. And so burning the midnight oil, where did that phrase come from? Do you know?
No, where did it come from?
So when you used to go to bed, when the sun went down, sometimes it was early as 5:30, 6 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock. When you rested after about 6 hours, which happens to be around midnight, your body is ready to get up. And so guess what you did? You got up and you burned the midnight oil, which was a very beautiful communal time for people. So you met, you congregated, you shared a little bit of food, you shared warmth, you actually spoke with one another. And that was called first sleep into the midnight oil. Then you went into what's called second sleep. And then you would until the sun came up. And so we just would do that. That's how our body and brain should be cultivated. We should not be having blue light until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock,
Right.
stimulated, and then expect a good night's sleep.
Right. Right.
So here's where we go. There isn't a factor of modern life that I would not be able to argue is pathological, period. And it's because we're built 200 or 20,000 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So things like sleep is absolutely paramount,
Yeah.
but movement is the bigger thing.
Movement, yeah, movement, and that relates so much to purpose and survival and taking action and self-efficacy. And I think that one of the things last week, I understand Maria Sarai was on, and she was talking about her own experience with hitting the wall, right, Carolyn? And she was talking about hitting the wall, and that one of the things that she realized was that she wasn't really acknowledging or being in tune with her own feelings. And, I just want to remind people, regulating your emotions is not the same thing as denying your reality. Okay. And you have to give yourself permission to feel, permission to be human, permission to have those conflicts, and you might feel ambivalent, you might feel multiple emotions at once and not know how to sort it out. That's part of this race, part of this journey.
A key thing to add here is that we know from various studies that when we try to develop the capacity to suppress our negative emotions, okay, we can do that. But the thing is that when we develop that ability to suppress those negative emotions, we also suppress the ability to express positive emotions, because the positive and negative emotions are kind of differentiated up in the neocortex, right? The higher centers of our mind, where the feelings are handled is subconscious. And so the subconscious doesn't really differentiate between positive and negative feelings. It's stress or no stress. So
that is the perfect segue into what I was going to ask you. So let's talk about emotions and cortisol and good feelings versus bad feelings.
Yeah. So cortisol is a beautiful example of something that is absolutely necessary for adequate functioning in the body. Anyone who has either too much cortisol or too little cortisol knows that there are very significant consequences. Cushing's disease is just one of them, right? And so either too much or not enough is not good. There is this optimal level of basically everything in the body, and cortisol is one of those. Cortisol is absolutely needed for normal functioning, but too much of it too long is like too much of anything too long. It can lead to ways for the body to compensate, okay? And so cortisol is one of those things that is a blessing. It is such a wonderful medicine in the body, produced by the body, but if it's not able to be regulated in a natural way, meaning it comes on when it needs to, and then it's metabolized when it needs to, it will absolutely cause problems.
So
and
I was just going to say, it's a stress hormone that in some ways acts like an alarm system.
Absolutely. Yep. So the alarm system is just part of, yep. So cortisol is just part of the alarm system. Absolutely.
And so when you have, emotions like cortisol, it's neither good or bad. We're not, emotions, can be looked at this way. Emotions can be looked at as signals or alarm bells to tell us, what is this feeling trying to show me or alert me to? These are signals that are a body bringing our attention to something, maybe telling you something that's off kilter, or telling you to take action, or telling you to think about something in a new way. So if you try to not be judgmental about your emotions, but to think about emotions in a way, it's not either good or bad, but it's a type of an alarm system. And what are your emotions right now trying to tell you?
Yep. And the alarm systems are things that are naturally designed, like pain. So
Ooh.
pain and the development of chronic pain is my research. And some people's immediate reaction when I say this is understandable, but I like people to take a pause, and I say, pain is the best gift that we have ever been given, period.
Tell us why.
And the reason why, so some people go, I'm sorry, if you've ever been in pain, I called you out on that. I'm like, so I've run ultra marathons before. I think I have had pain, yes, and I can tell stories about just how much pain I had in doing this. But so there's the better way to think of this is, what do you think would happen if you were born without the ability to sense pain? Okay, so I'd like the actual audience to put in the chat function, what do you think the outcome of a life would be without the ability to sense pain? Would it be a good life or not? Rachel immediately says you'd die very quickly.
Yeah.
You'd get hurt more. You would not survive. So these are absolute truisms. And so there's something called congenital insensitivity to pain, or CIP. And the average person with CIP dies before they reach their mid to late teens. They literally walk themselves into their grave. Okay. So the lack of pain equals death. Now, chronic pain makes you want to kill yourself. Okay. If you're in insufferable, intractable pain, you do want to end your life. And so there's this balance point. The key thing is without it, we're not going to live. We're not going to be alive. If we have too much, we're not going to survive very well. Same thing with cortisol. Same thing with everything else. Same thing with our emotions. If we lack emotions and are completely apathetic, which is what that means, we don't really live a very good life, right? I personally love to work with angry people. I love working with angry people because the converse is working with apathetic people. Have you ever worked with an apathetic person? Is it enjoyable?
No.
Can you guess why I would like to work with angry people? Anyone? Why do you think I would like to work with angry people? Why do you suppose you get angry? Can I ask you, Sherry? When you get angry, why do you suppose you're getting angry?
Oh, I have my anger as an iceberg. And underneath that iceberg, usually the biggest thing floating for me is fear.
Okay, so that's a negative. What's a positive behind the anger?
Gary,
Somebody.
can I pop in? I think it's because you care. You're angry because you care.
There you go.
David White, the poet, if you ever read anything of his, he says, anger is the most sincere form of care and compassion you can ever have.
Oh,
it's the inability to handle it. You care so much about something, you're willing to risk everything because of it. It's absolute care. So I love working with angry people, because if you can get them on your side, or if you can channel that energy, there's nothing that can't be done. So when we get angry about something, pay attention to it. That's that alarm that goes, why am I so angry? Because I care. Thank you, Caroline. That's
beautiful, Caroline. And the reason why we brought this up now in this talk about hitting the wall or moving through the wall is because you cannot move past that wall or go forward or break through the wall until you've given yourself permission to feel the emotions. Identify the emotions, feel the emotions. You won't break through or move through the wall until you've given yourself that opportunity to explore the emotions, whether it's anger or frustration or fear.
Absolutely.
You know,
And
Scott Barry Kaufman has this saying I love. I'm going to steal it from him. If your boat is full of leaks, you don't care what direction you're sailing.
so true.
I'm sorry, Gary, go ahead. I interrupted.
I was just going to say that one of the biggest hurdles for us to get past a particular hurdle in our life, right? So is us. Okay, so the biggest hurdle is not usually the hurdle. It really is us. It's us either denying that the hurdle is there,
Yeah,
belittling the hurdle, pretending it's not quite as big as it may be. Let's face it. When somebody dies who is very close to us, our world is rocked. Period. And if the best thing you can do in the day is cry in your bed, be proud of that. That's the best thing you can do. If that's your best, don't judge yourself. Don't let anyone else judge you. Be okay with that, because that's active recovery. And we'll talk a little bit about active recovery.
well,
You need to sit and
so
just be.
I wanted to ask you about that. Here's active recovery. So can you explain what that is, Gary?
Yeah, so we live in a world that encourages us from basically day one to do, go, 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 go. You know, we get rewarded in school for how much we do, how quickly we can do stuff. We get promotions in our job for efficiency and effectiveness, and how much we do. Well, if you've ever thought about ultra marathoning, and you may not have, the worst thing you can do in an ultra marathon is start running and expect to keep running. Because like you said before, our energy stores are only so finite. Okay. Active recovery is a mental way of looking at this reality in a very positive way. And so athletes who train for pretty much everything, but especially ultra marathoners, know that you must incorporate what are called active recovery days into your training regimen. And that means you do not run. Now, it's not that you're not doing anything, because mentally that could go, I'm being lazy, I'm not really applying myself, I'm not sticking to whatever. But it's like the other way of looking at that is, I am dedicating this day to letting my body recover, letting my muscles regenerate, letting the inflammation abate, letting whatever. And it's this beautiful, positive, very active thing, even if you're not doing anything. You are doing something. It's just not, what we tend to think of as rewarding. Do, produce. And so active recovery is a critical thing for pretty much every part of life.
Yeah. And that's, we do that mentally as well as physically. And there's a difference between quitting and pausing. And there's a lot of power in taking a pause. Getting off the treadmill isn't the same as quitting, or going on walking instead of running isn't the same as quitting.
Yep. I have a quick story, if you don't mind me sharing. So the first 24-hour run I did was in Philadelphia, and I happened to come up after about 3 hours on this elderly gentleman. He was in it. Well, I don't want to call him elderly. Anyway, he was older than me by a substantial amount, but he had the T-shirt from the first event. And I came up to him, and this is the first time I'd ever done this. And so we're just kind of plodding along. And I said, you've already done this before and you're back. He said, oh yeah. And I said, well, tell me your secret. Well, I want to be able to come back and enjoy this. I said, so what would you recommend? And he said, 2 things. The first one is, if you're running comfortably now, which was 3 hours into a 24-hour run, he said, if you're running comfortably now, you're running too fast.
Oh, wow.
And he goes, think about that. He said, in 15 hours, you'll still have 6 left. So he says, you may be comfortable now, but that's way too fast. And so I thought, wow, okay, so that's good. So active recovery means you can actually and should slow down. Slow down, because if you're in it for the long haul, take your time. Don't try to rush it. Then the second thing he asked me was, so you're a runner, right? And I said, yeah. And he says, do you think you're competing with me right now? And I mean, he's this older guy. And so I said, no. And he says, you're a runner. Are you competing with me right now? And I said, well, he says, the second thing is the harder thing. He said, take the ego out. He says, you are not competing with anyone but 24 hours.
Yeah, the time.
But how many times of our life do we compare ourselves to others,
Yeah,
including our former self?
yeah,
And if we do that, we're competing against a non-real competitor
yeah.
to our own demise.
Well, one of the things that, we know from stress research and for, any type of prolonged stress, whether it's running or dealing with an illness, is that the skill you should develop in converting long-term idealistic plans into short-term realistic goals that you can actually master or succeed at achieving. And that's one of the things that helps, build our resilience. That's part of the broaden and build theory of Barbara Fredrickson, to talk about that. And, Gary, one of the things we talk about when so many of us have gone through different types of marathons, whether it's a marathon of loss, grief, illness, stress in our lives. And let's look at the positive of that, right? We need that. You talked about, what makes us resilient. It's this matrix of coping, emotional intelligence, grit, making sense of what we did, making meaning of what we did.
Yeah, and it is absolutely a matrix that includes the positive. And so we do need to have these quicker, easier wins in order to give us satisfaction, to prove to ourselves that we can do things, we can move forward. So we do need to build on those positives, not even in question, okay? The other thing that we do need to realize is the power of the negative, the power of the struggle. And so I liken a lot of the negatives that happen in my life to little inoculations. And so we're in the pandemic now. We can talk about vaccines a little bit more, is that when we go through certain events of our life and we survive them, we can either go into a post-traumatic stress disorder, so we're not able to come back out of them, or we get hit, we go into a post-traumatic state, and then we come back out of it. And so if it's a small t trauma, if you will, we're able to be hit, we're able to rally around the stuff within us and around us and come back to our baseline. That's like a little dose of vaccine. And so every time we get hit with these little things that happen in our life, we actually build up an immunity so that when a bigger thing comes along, we start to go down into a post-traumatic state, but our body and our mind goes, hold on a second here. I've actually seen some of this before. I'm fine. I'm fine. Maybe I haven't seen this before, but I'm fine. And so the things that happen that don't kill us don't necessarily make us stronger, because they can ruin our lives. However, they actually can make us stronger. And so things like being exposed to low-grade pathogens when we're a kid. And so this is not really the audience to talk about this, but we can talk about grandkids maybe, or let them eat dirt. Let them get messy. Honestly, let them pick their noses and eat it. Let them. That's what kids do. What that does is that exposes the immune system to low-level pathogens. You develop an immunity around those low-level pathogens so that when the higher, stronger pathogens come along, your immune system is actually better poised to attack those. And so washing hands to the point of sterility is not good. Okay, now there's a balance point. You do have to live a clean life-ish, but think of what we used to do when we were out on the savannah or, outside all the time. We had dirty fingernails. We were being exposed to a lot of different things. Just let life happen a little bit more naturally. Okay, now in the pandemic, don't go out and start kissing everyone. That's not.
And wash your hands. But we talk about the metaphor for life, though. You need these low-level pathogens, these little traumas or little stressors that we learn to overcome so that we can become more resilient for the bigger stressors and challenges and losses in our life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, and so these are, you know, some of the, you can think about post-traumatic growth in a few ways. This is one way I do it. Gary has his way of doing it, but you can think about, you know, optimism, perception of control, locus of control, your coping style, your strong sense of self, relationships, finding meaning. Do you want to talk about this, Gary, more and what you've found in your work in terms of how do you foster post-traumatic growth after, you know, what we've just talked about?
Absolutely. And so to put a plug in for the Whole Being Institute and the Spire approach, it really is a holistic look at the 5 different lives that we lead. And so people are probably familiar with it, but for those of you who aren't, the acronym stands for spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional lives. And so Spire is a beautiful word root for inspiration and perspiration, and quite honestly, expiration. And so there's lots of word plays on there, but the key thing is to recognize that these are 5 lives that need to be cultivated every single day. Start with the S, the spiritual. If you don't go to church, if you don't have a spiritual practice, you are devoid of a vitamin.
Yeah.
You're devoid of something, right? If you go to church once on a Saturday or a Sunday and live your life angry for the rest of the week, that's like the P of physical, meaning you only exercise once per week. Do you think you're going to get really fit really quickly if you exercise once per week, maybe for an hour? It's like eating one good meal a week and you go, ah, got it covered. So the spiritual part of our lives is a sense of wonder, a sense of exploration. And so very interestingly, if we cultivate all of these simultaneously, every one of them gets better. Every one of them gets stronger. Now, a key thing to realize is that oftentimes the deficiency of one shows up as a symptom in another. Okay, let's use an example here is, so Sherry, let me ask you, if you were feeling lost and kind of out of sync with your creator, so your spiritual life is gone, okay? You haven't exercised, you've eaten crap, you haven't really slept, so your physical life is kind of out of sync. Intellectually, you're not being stimulated, you're not growing, you're not learning. And then emotionally, so we're skipping to the E, emotionally, you're kind of frazzled. How do you think your relationship is going to be with the people you love?
Right. It's going to be compromised.
And so one of the biggest things that we need to realize, and very similar to the immune system, is nothing works in isolation.
Yeah.
Don't depend on cultivating one thing and having everything else fall into place.
That's so true.
Cultivate everything. Absolutely everything. It is this matrix. It is absolutely.
It's all of the above. I mean, it's really, this builds your resilience system. And it's like you said, it's a matrix and it's a dynamic interplay of all those elements of Spire, you know, and I want to just focus on one thing at the bottom because it's near and dear to my research, which is making meaning, make sense of experience, learn from it, meaning and purpose. In the brain, we have some fabulous neuroimaging studies that have come up in the past few years that actually show where meaning is in the anterior cingulate, or where it shows up when you're testing for making meaning and feeling meaning and purpose out of an action. And it's very closely tied to relationships. And others, your relationship with others, and you're not deriving meaning in isolation. You're not living in a vacuum. So Gary, as we go into this, I love, this is Gary, everybody. I want to talk about making meaning of this. This is our last slide for today, and then we're going to go into some questions. Gary, talk to us about your bowls and this wonderful artistry that you do with the trees.
Oh, thank you so much. And so this is an example of what I call beauty after trauma, or growth after death, or life after death. And so if you've ever walked along a wooded area, and maybe you can do this the next time you're out, I would love for you to become aware of this, because a lot of people pass by trees and they don't really realize just how dynamic they are. But every once in a while, you'll look up into a tree and you'll see a growth, like a tumor. And sometimes they'll show up as just little growths that stick off to the side of the bark, the trunk, and they look like little moles, okay? Sometimes they're massive growths, but they're called burl, and that's B-U-R-L. Here in the UK, they call them burr, B-U-R-R. But anyway, what it is any living entity can have cells that go rogue, that go kind of bad, if you will. And that usually ends up as a cancer, okay? So burl are tree cancers, often following trauma, some kind of insult, some kind of trauma to the tree, and the tree reacts. Now, very importantly, these form because of the trauma. And so these are completely natural, but unnatural. But yet, if you've ever seen a burl, and unfortunately you can't really see these here, is that the graining patterns that arise in this tumors grow amorphically is what it's called. And so it's kind of without structure. But the graining patterns are not like anything you will ever see. It's because of the trauma that the beauty is created. And so what I do is, when I'm going along on my runs, or wherever I'm out camping or whatever, if there is a burl on a tree that can be harvested, I will be a tree cancer surgeon. I will cut it off, right? When you cut it off, it just kind of looks like a blob. But as you start to carve into it, as you really immerse yourself in the trauma, you start to see the beauty arise.
Wow.
And what comes out are these unbelievably breathtaking pieces. Now, the key thing is as the carver, if you will, I have no idea what's going to show up. So the carver gets damaged. I do. I walk away with bloody hands. I've actually had stitches in my knee from a chainsaw. I mean, I've just, but what it is it's recognizing that in order for the beauty to show up, sometimes we need to dig deep, get bloody, because when we do, these are the types of things that arise. And so it's life after death, because the tree can die with the cancer. But what I do is I take them and I give them new life. And so unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the burl that I used with my wife and I when we got married. And it's a perfect yin-yang shaped heart, or two hearts that come together, but it's a natural burl that I carved that we held our rings in.
Oh, wow. Gary,
So
that is so beautiful. And I love how you really show us that there's power in hardship.
There is. There can be.
There can be.
So a very good friend of mine at the University of Nottingham, a guy named Stephen Joseph, wrote a book, and it was based on Nietzsche's dictum that is not finished. And so Nietzsche's dictum is, what doesn't kill us? And I would love to know the answer of people in the chat function. What's the finish of that quote? What doesn't kill us makes us what? If you know Nietzsche, he was pretty clear about this. He said, what doesn't kill us makes us...
It's also a song.
Stronger, 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 right? Well, Stephen Joseph, Stephen Joseph is a post-traumatic growth researcher. And Stephen wrote a book called What Doesn't Kill Us, okay? And he stopped Nietzsche's dictum full bore right there. Because what doesn't kill us actually just doesn't kill us. But can it mess us up? Yeah, I mean, it can ruin our lives. It can actually drive us to end our life. But the key thing is It doesn't necessarily have to end that way. So what doesn't kill us can create an unbelievably beautiful life, because we stop worrying about our hair. We stop worrying about our clothes. We stop worrying about, do I have lettuce in my teeth? We stop worrying about these petty little things that, quite honestly, don't really make a life. What
Yeah.
makes a life is the people in our life, our growth, our
Yep.
connection. It's everything else. And so what I love about this, and about running or knitting, or I don't care what the art is, and all of this is art, is we are the artisans of our own creation.
Oh, I love that. We are the artisans of our own creation. I love that. Well, you know what? I wanted to leave time for us because we're almost up to the hour, and I wanted a few questions. Do we have time for a couple of questions, Caroline?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, first of all, this is a beautiful burl bowl. It's just incredible. And I didn't know that, Gary. And there's that book. What is it called? The Hidden Life of Trees.
Yes.
Have you heard about this book?
Oh, what a wonderful book. Oh, everyone should read that.
Yeah. And it really talks about the root systems, right, that trees have, and the way that they nourish, and they're all connected. And we certainly are all connected by the air that we breathe, the oceans, everything.
So we're ready for questions. Yeah. So my burl.
Yeah, there are some in the chat. Let me just, there was one in the very beginning. Let's just see. Well, Bunny had a comment. She said that the Boston Marathon is impressive. I believe one must now qualify for entrance to participate. Once upon a time, I was an elite runner. Those were the days. Wow, that's great. That's awesome that you said. And I've ran one marathon. Anybody else put in the chat if you have run a marathon or done something that you didn't think you could do physically, and you accepted the challenge that was given to Gary by Tal, something like that. Okay, someone asked, explain how reversatol is used or not relating to cortisol production. Do you have any opinions about that? Gary, have you heard of that?
Yeah, so I am a pharmacist. So, so reversatol has actually been described as a two-edged sword. Okay, so that is a beautiful, I think, way of stating, very similar to cortisol, very similar to other things that that enter the body makes naturally, or whatever, is that the antidote can become a poison very quickly, just like a poison can be used as a therapeutic. And so some of the most powerful therapeutics we have are actually the most poisonous. It's the dose, it's how we use it. And so very similar to cortisol or testosterone or anything else that is associated with particular outcomes, the outcome is determined by how the system is created as much as the properties of the compound. And so if you put in, say, cortisol, or let's use testosterone because that's a better example, is if you give 100 people, 100 men, testosterone, like it's an anabolic steroid, how many of them will go into roid rage? So that was the steroid rage that we used to hear about. The next question would be, how many women out of 100 would go into roid rage? Because we tend to think of steroids being associated with male aggression. Well, the key thing is the testosterone does the same thing in everyone, but the outcome is different depending on how the person is wired. Okay, so aggression shows up in all people who are pre-wired, are sensitized to aggression, but it doesn't in other people. And so reversatol is one of those things that I go, it's something to look at, just like everything else to look at, and go, is there hardcore data that it's very clean? The answer is no. But does it mean that it's not a potential benefit for some people? The answer is maybe. So I don't really want to get into, but that's something.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And then there's another question. I think that about cortisol, I think that sparked a lot of curiosity, is there a way to measure how much cortisol you have? And do you want to, would you want to supplement if you don't have enough?
So the question is you might be able to measure it, but what does that tell you?
It's a moment in time. There have been studies that measure cortisol, many studies, and they're really fascinating. It teaches us a lot about stress and the mind as well. So, and exertion. So you're really measuring that at that moment in time, you see. So if let's say you had some stressful event earlier in the day, okay, you have to like measure it right at that stressful event. It's not something that you would measure, I think, in your normal daily pattern. And even people who suffer from like Cushing's disease, for example, they will tell you, these patients will tell you that it's very frustrating to not have their levels tested at the correct time of day.
Yeah.
Take that, Gary.
And I would absolutely agree with that. So everything we do is a snapshot in time, but the body works in microsecond epochs. So it's very, very fast, or minute long epochs. And so again, it's very, very fast, but it's also very specific to very tiny areas of the body. So when we measure something from the blood, what are we measuring? We're measuring something from the blood. Now, it can give us relevant information, but how is it relevant over the course of time? And so, like Sherry said, there are times when we're stressed. Well, the cortisol level shoots up. So does our adrenaline. So does a lot of other things. But if you measure it later on, it's absolutely fine. Okay. The key thing that I would recommend to everyone is, in order to minimize the toxic effects of the stress response, because the stress response is needed and natural, it's beautiful, but we used to fight or flee when we were stressed. How many of us fight our boss when our boss yells at us? How many of us have a chance to literally run away? We're stuck in the office. We're stuck in front of them. We're stuck in front of the Zoom call. And we sit in that toxic soup for hours. We ruminate it. We actually build the soup to be more toxic instead of letting our system just go, I gotta run. I gotta run. So the best thing we can ever do is, if we're stressed, stop, drop, and do 20. And if you can't do 20, just do whatever you can. Get your heart moving, because that metabolizes all of those stress releases in the moment, which is exactly what you should have happen.
Gary, are you going to be surprised when I tell you that I interviewed a top researcher for Parkinson's, and she said that toxic soup is what she feels, along with aging and toxic environment, is actually a precursor to creating a lot of our dis-ease, including
Yes.
Parkinson's. And when I talk to a lot of my students that I work with, who they talk about having a very stressful event before they were diagnosed.
Yes.
Or, you know what I mean? So I think the impact of stress cannot be underscored, and how individual it is, like how we measure stress ourselves. Like, for example, I can tell it when my shoulders get really tight. I think, oh yeah, I'm doing okay. And then I like touch my shoulders and I go, maybe not. Right?
Well,
Can you comment on that a little bit?
I just want to tell you
Either
that my research on stress was with stress and cancer, and they did a literature review on that. And there's been really good research on people perceiving that their cancer has shown up at a couple of years or within 2 or 3 years of a major stressful event. I think our understanding of stress can be encapsulated in a helpful way that I learned at Kripalu 30 years ago from Gurudev, who led Kripalu back then, which is the same. Stress is resistance to what is. So when you're feeling really stressed out, take a pause and think about, what is it I am resisting at this moment? What am I fighting, fleeing? What am I trying to avoid? What is it? It's what is it that is in my life right now, or in the situation that I'm trying to resist? And that is the first step, I think, to managing stress in a positive way.
Beautiful.
So I want to remind everyone, I'm sorry, Ken,
go ahead.
we're at the top. Please join us for part 2 of this Gary and Sherry show on hitting the COVID wall, breaking through the COVID wall, which is next month on June 15th. We would love to see everybody back because there's more. There's part 2. There's more good stuff coming your way.
Right. And we have some questions about chronic pain and managing trauma. And I also want to remind everybody or let you know that on Sunday, of course, we have this Thursday, our Positive Psychology Hour. I will be away. It's my birthday and I will be out of town helping, visiting my parents in California. But Phoebe Atkinson will be taking over for me. And she, as always, she's amazing. She's going to do a fabulous job. Enjoy her. But then on Sunday night, we have our all-night cocoon. And that is, you can stay the night. Megan McDonough will be introducing Scott Barry Kaufman and Dan Tomasulo, who will be talking about hope through a Jewish lens at 8:30. And then we're going to have Chef AJ come and teach us how to do a free, dairy-free, sugar-free cheesecake. I don't even know how that's possible. And that tastes amazing because she's incredible at that. And we also have Dr. Joel Furman talking about a plant-based healthy diet and how we do that, in addition to a gazillion other people. We have 11 tracks, over 70 program. We'll be up till 5 a.m. So if you have trouble sleeping, sign up. And even if you don't, just sign up and it will be recorded. I'll put that link in the chat again. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Sherry. Oh my gosh, this was a great Gary and Sherry hour.
Yes, it's great fun. Thank you, everyone. We're going to see you on June 15th because we didn't get to answer all your questions. We want to address those next month.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to remove all the spotlights, put us on gallery view. Feel free to unmute yourself and say goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Caroline. In the chat. Thank you so much. Thank you, Phoebe. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you. Thank you for those birthday wishes.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. It was great. Thanks.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday. Gary.
Thank you.
Oh, c'est birthday, Caroline jeudi, hein? Ouais,
yeah, that too.
Bye. Happy birthday, Caroline.
Thank you, Marcel. Thank you. And I'm going to put all these programs. Oh, we have an amazing program. It's a harpist is going to be doing yoga and live harp music. If you need to de-stress, take that one. Oh, Gary, yeah, she's amazing. Amy Kemi, she plays beautifully, and and Whitney teaches a yoga class. So check that one out. Harp music and yoga. All right, take care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.